I'm James Crepea, and he is Aaron Fentress, and you are listening to or watching the next edition and newest edition of the Ducks Confidential podcast here for the Oregonian and OregonLive. We are in game week, Aaron, so we have made it through fall camp, and it is now finally
camp. Congratulations! I want to give you. I know how tough it is. You know, almost every day, so I give you applause.
It is part of it's why they give us the big bucks. So it's part and parcel to preseason coverage, but it's now game week for the Ducks and for most all of college football, except for the about 10 teams who played last week in week 0, UCLA being one of them, along with Hawaii, teams who are on both Oregon and Oregon State schedules, at different times, respectively. So you got to see a little bit by way of Pac-12 action last week, but you get the full slate this week with week 1. Ducks getting into their season on Saturday against Fresno State at 11 a.m. at Autzen Stadium. So we'll take a look at this week's game and also delve into the depth chart. And I know some of the personnel decisions will be topics for fans this week, obviously leading into the game. And we'll go into it a little bit here on this edition of the podcast as well. So, Aaron, what were some that stuck out to you? What were some that interested you by way of the depth chart?
Well, first thing, I saw I like to sort of monitor what the fans are chirping about on Twitter, and I saw a lot of people talking about kicker, which I thought was fascinating because usually kicker is kind of an afterthought, but Camden Lewis last year was 1 for 4, and he's being challenged by a former walk-on, Henry
Cattleman.
Sorry.
Cattle Monster.
Cattle Monster. Micah Pittman, I think, called him Cattle Monster or something like that, who was, the fan favorite right now because he went 4 for 4 last year. But Lewis is listed ahead of him right now. How tight is that competition, and sort of where do you think that's going?
Well, the or designations on depth charts, I never get too caught up in who is ahead of who necessarily, because unless it's specifically spelled out, everybody's got a little bit of a different methodology with that. Some coaches, it is a sequence, even when it's listed as or. But like a perfect example of why not necessarily get caught up in that. Well, at running back, C.J. Verdell and Travis Dye are listed as the slash. Well, they're not going to run out there with 21 personnel all of a sudden. I mean, it could happen, I suppose, but realistically, they're not both starting simultaneously unless one's split out wide receiver or they're implementing a new formation that we haven't quite seen yet. So that's why I say I never get too caught up necessarily, but because there are some coaches will do it by numbers, some will do it alphabetically, some will do it by sequence of who actually is ahead of who. But the or designation, like I say, I never get too caught up one way or the other. Having said that, I don't want to say I'm not surprised. It was, of everything on the depth chart to me yesterday, I thought that the kicker spot was the most surprising, and we'll get to some others as well. Having said that, for the reasons that you spell out, but having said that, I've never been one to believe in that, especially at the college level, that in a really small sample, and in fairness to Camden Lewis, like last season was 1 for 4. Obviously, his kickoffs are not particularly strong in terms of touchback percentage. And you go back to 2019, and the number of kicks that he had, obviously, he had the game winner against Washington State. That wins you a football game. He didn't lose them games. He just had struggles, obviously. There's no sugarcoating it. He caught on later in the season. He did better late in 19 than he did earlier in 19. He did poorly in a small sample last season. But we are talking about a small sample. I have never been one to believe that, particularly at the college level, that a couple of missed kicks means eternal failure for a player.
Right.
I've just never ascribed to that. To me, it's almost like
it doesn't make sense.
No, to me, it's almost like the equivalent of saying like a baseball pitcher who gets the yips or a fielder for that matter who suddenly commits a few errors and has just a terrible week. And obviously in baseball, you're playing every day, or a couple of just terrible outings in a row. And now all of a sudden you're saying like, oh, this guy's no good anymore. And you go, oh, come on. I mean, are you actually seeing some things in practice? And by all accounts, from what we've heard between both the spring and in fall camp, was that this was a competition and that both kickers are doing well. And all the reports that we got, and again, we hadn't seen every which practice and seen in the practices that the portions of practice we see, field goal kicking is not exactly at the top of the list of items that are either on our mind or may not even be happening while we're out there.
You're not charting them? in practice?
There's one point, this goes back like 2 years ago. At one point, if they were going while we were there, yeah, I would chart who made what and of what distance. But
greater man than I.
That was not something that was front of mind here. And in the first fall scrimmage that we were at, yeah, they made their kicks, both of them. So it really wasn't much to differentiate in the samples that we were able to see this fall. Having said that, getting back to your point, was it surprising? Somewhat, because I am a little bit of a believer in if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But how do you say, particularly top to bottom under Mario Cristobal across the entire roster all the time for years now, it's meritocracy, it's competition every day. You earn what you get on the field from what you do in practice and then in games. How do you take that position? And then if Camden Lewis is out there just nailing kicks all day, every day, this is not knocking what Henry Cattleman might have been doing. How do you say to a player, hey, I know you're like 98, 99, 100% what you're doing every day. But tough. Like that just, you right. Can't really do that. So I understand. Having said that, is this still an area that Oregon has to be consistent kicking? I don't think you're necessarily worried. Look, if you're an Oregon fan, you don't want to be thinking about the kicker. Nobody wants to be thinking about the kicker.
The problem is Oregon fans have been thinking about kicker for a
long time. I understand.
A few years,
I get it, but you'd never want to have to think about it. So you were thrilled that you had stability. You were thrilled that Cattleman was out there providing stability. Obviously, they made all their PATs, and Cattleman made the one at Cal that was from 40-some-odd yards out. He made it 3 times over and would have made it from probably 50 yards out on a PAT, no less. So, yes, he has a strong leg. He has shown it. He has proven it. He's been consistent with it in a small sample. Here's one element I will say as further context. For all that Cattleman did last season, and it was great. Again, the PAT was outrageous at Cal. He did it in empty buildings. And in terms of kicking on the road, that is a whole other ballgame. Now, obviously, for this week 1, hey, we'll see what happens. We'll see who gets trotted out there. We'll see who's handling kickoffs. It probably will be Camden Lewis, at least on kickoffs, and then on place kicking, on PATs in general, and field goals if they take any. But to me, the road games is the bigger demarcation line potentially, because, like I say, kicking in an empty building and making kicks, home or road last season, sure. And that's not knocking down anybody. Again, I'm sure there were kickers out there who stunk all over the place or who were great all over the place.
Right.
But this season is just going to be playing different for everybody in the Pac-12, but particularly in the kicking game, because you have buildings with people back in them. And again, kicking at a full Ohio Stadium is a little bit different than kicking at an empty Memorial Stadium in Berkeley. It just
also, you mentioned the game winner against Washington State. If I remember correctly, there was a lot of angst about that, where people were like, "Don't play for the field goal." Right? Do you remember that? Am I right?
Well, they didn't have a choice but to play for it because time was against them, and they had the timeout. I mean, they had
pass up, taking some shots, or being more aggressive.
Herbert drove down the field, got to Jawan Johnson a couple of times to get into field goal range, and that was all they could. That's it. That's all they could do. That's as far as they could get.
But okay, regardless.
But nevertheless, with his general angst, because you hadn't seen a proven situation, and at that point, already with a loss, the playoff is riding on the line at that particular juncture. And it was the back and forth only minutes earlier where Wazoo drove the field and took the lead. So it was a back and forth fourth quarter. Wazoo took the lead with like 90 seconds to go. And then obviously the game-winning drive that was set up, there was angst the whole drive because, hey, this is relapse and redux of the season opener against Auburn. Hey, you had a shot at a drive. That was even less time. That was like no time at all. But nevertheless, there was a kickoff return that set things up to at least get into decent field position to set up for a throw to the end zone. Okay, you hadn't seen the game-winning drive. So the whole drive, there's angst, and then it's here comes the field goal, and you don't know what's going to happen, and the playoffs riding on the line and everything else. Here, is there angst in general because you want to see consistent field goal kicking? That's every college football fan base in America. You could have had the Ray Guy Award winner. If you lost them, you are absolutely terrified about kicking because that's just the way college kickers are. That's everywhere. Ask Alabama fans how they feel about kicking other than last year.
Right. Well, my main
That was a
point gonna be,
decade
though,
long.
is that he nailed it. He won them a game, like you said, and that has to stick in Mario's mind when you're looking at the totality of everything. Like you said, don't make too much of a big a deal because he missed a couple last year in a weird season.
Body of work.
This guy has won a game, and for Mario, that carries a lot of weight.
Absolutely, body of work. Came through in a big moment, and again, kicked well. Not after that as well. Kicked well, did well after that. And for as much as we talked about things like kickoff and touchback percentage, in the bowl game, a couple of kickoffs over there did better and fared better there than he did earlier in the season. Now, again, we're talking about really small samples here. Last season was a mess of a season. It was half a season, and then when you have an even smaller sample because you split time in your role, it's really tiny. Right. You need a greater sample size. Obviously, that's what they're seeing at practice. I would hesitate to jump to any conclusions one way or the other. Either that there's going to be a change, and that if there is a change, that it's not warranted or merited based on what Cam Lewis may be showing in practice. Right. Again, you can't say a guy missed a couple of kicks a year ago, so therefore he can never make them ever again. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
I found the play-by-play. So they got to the 33 with 34 seconds left. Then a big pass from Herbert to Johnson to the 9. They still had time, and they ran with CJ to the 6, 14 seconds left. So they could have taken a shot to the end zone. I remember Twitter was freaking out. Not that Twitter matters, but they played it right. I mean, they played it correctly.
I don't know how many timeouts they had. I'm trying to remember now. The game was almost 2 years ago.
Right. Again,
but how many timeouts they would have had left? But
I'm not saying they made a bad decision. I'm just saying fans were like, go for the end zone, go for the end zone. I remember thinking, no, we played for the field goal here unless you absolutely don't trust him. Clearly, Mario trusted him, and he came through. Yeah. And that says a lot about Mario's belief in him, that he didn't say, okay, Herbert, win this with a touchdown pass, even if we have timeout issues and clock's running, because I don't trust the kicker. He went with his kicker, and he made a 26-yarder and became a hero.
Yeah. Got carried off, and that's the way it's supposed to go. So, again, you never want to have to think about in those terms. I realize that here we are spending this much time talking about the kicking position, on August 31st. But nevertheless, I get it, because again, this was not a absolutely surefire position in the first place, and for the fans who it caused a general degree of angst, I think we gave you a pretty good summation of where things may stand, but nevertheless,
summation. Okay,
they are the kickers. So
they are the kickers. Yeah. Okay. Next up, this is a pretty interesting situation. Wide receiver X Troy Franklin, true freshman, came in early. I think he was in January, so he was there for all spring and all the offseason stuff. Is the starter right now ahead of Devin Williams, who obviously was a little bit up and down last season, but seemed to be the front runner to start there this year. But Mario said, hey, he's had some setbacks, had some injury situations. He's still going to be a major part of things moving forward and could still obviously earn a bigger role as we go. How do you sort of see how that played out, and what do you think the relationship is depth-wise between Franklin and Devin, in terms of, is Devin going to have to do a lot to catch Franklin? Is Franklin that good, or is this going to be something that goes back and forth, or they're just going to rotate because they're both really good?
Well, all three freshmen are that good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you love the freshman receivers. You made that clear.
All three freshmen are that good. They are the future of the position, not just because they're freshmen and therefore they're going to be around for a minute. No, they're the future of the position. And I think I even said it here before on either the last edition or the 2 editions ago of the podcast, saying the question is the future, does the future and the present, do they intersect?
Right.
And do they supersede and surpass what is the present? That was to me, and is to me still, the question for the remainder of the season. Because yes, Troy Franklin getting the starting job at X, was that a surprise? No. One, overall skill and ability, and was, as you mentioned, an early enrollee. So was Dante Thornton, who is listed as a backup at the Z. So I knew that they would be both of them would be no worse than the backup roles. I mean, there was simply no way. There was no way on the depth chart that was going to be the case. So having said that, when the floor is backup, there's only one direction to go. And given that Devin Williams had been dealing with some limitations and injury issues here during fall camp, that was basically it. That's not to say that Troy didn't do enough to surpass him regardless. He very well might have, because he was listed as duck of the day a couple of times, both on offense and on special teams during the course of fall camp. Him and Dante Thornton, again, both were here in the spring. Both did well in the spring. Thornton had the late touchdown. Franklin had led the team in catches and receiving yards during the spring game. Now, call it for what it is. Hey, it's a spring game. Yeah, they were with the twos against the twos and all. Yeah, I get it. And the twos for the defense is really the threes in terms of the defensive backs. I get it. But then they backed it up in the fall. And when they got time with the ones, they went out there and made plays. So I think it's going to be interesting to see not just Troy Franklin at the X while Devin Williams works his way back. And again, they're going to be in the rotation. At the receiver position, you're not 100% reps. I mean, that just doesn't happen. Even if Devin Williams were the starter, Troy Franklin was getting on the field. So same thing's going to be at the Z position. Giant Johnson III is going to be at the Z position. Dante Thornton's going to get on the field. It's not 100% of the time. So having said all that, I wasn't terribly surprised by the fact that he started. I had said to somebody during fall camp, I said, here's the question, basically, in terms of the receiving corps, is not just as we've laid out here. I said, hey, is this loyalty to experience because of what Giant Johnson III, what Jalen Red had bring to the table by way of being the super seniors, 2 of the 7 super seniors on the team, the only 2 who have been with the program the whole time. And that comes with a slight asterisk caveat for Cam McCormick because he's not, technically speaking, a super senior, though he actually has been around longer than either of those 2. But because he has additional eligibility, he's not in the group of super seniors. So do you give loyalty to the veteran leadership and the experience? Or do you give loyalty sheerly on talent and ability? And obviously what they bring to the field in practice, what they have to show. I mean, you don't just go, based on what your star ranking was as a recruit. And clearly these young guys are showing quite a bit, Troy being one of them. And we'll see as the season goes on. I'm not giving away anybody's jobs. I'm not saying, I'm not guaranteeing anybody's going to go shooting past or dropping behind anybody. But I was not the least bit surprised that Troy Franklin ended up getting the starting job because of what he had done and because of, like I say, mainly, also the limitations to Devin Williams just in terms of fall camp. Can he work his way back? Yeah. I mean, look, you saw him. Devin was a player who you saw it in such a small spurt last season. This is not exactly analogous, but it kind of goes to almost a similar situation of what we're talking about with kicker a second ago. All right, the beginning of the season, the first game, maybe even 2, but definitely first game and a half, he did better at Wazoo, but took him a minute to come on. Got to catch at Wazoo, helped out blocking for Jalen Red, getting him closer to the end zone on an end around. All right, so he showed some physicality in the blocking and in catching over the middle, taking a hit. Then did really well against UCLA. You saw a little bit, I think, with Oregon State. Then got hurt, missed the Cal game, didn't play in the Pac-12 title game, and basically was a non-factor in the second half of the season. So if you want to go on small sample size, jump to conclusions, well, for a couple of games, he was terrific, and he was leading them and took over the team lead and was far and away the leading receiver and a number 1 weapon. It wasn't even close.
Right.
And then, he got dinged up and he fell off traumatically. And you go, well, does that mean he's not any good anymore? No, it means he got hurt. Something happened. All right. Well, he probably was on his way to being in a pretty good position to hold on to his starting job. Got hurt and has to work his way back into that role. Do I still think he's going to be a contributor? Like Mario said yesterday, still has an opportunity to work back into that opportunity and those reps and everything. Yeah. And they expect it. And they need him to, frankly. You're not going to go out there and win as a team if you only got 2 or 3 receivers. You do need guys to play roles who are the 4, the 5, the 6 in the receiving corps.
Right. Absolutely. And the last time the Ducks were pretty deep at receiver was several years ago, and they spread. That was Mariota era, really. I mean, kind of think about it, and they spread the ball around to a lot of different people. Like like you said, the starting 3 doesn't mean the other 3 their backups aren't going to play a lot, especially if the passing game is successful. That's what I want to see. Like if they're successful throwing the ball, you want guys out there fresh, blowing the top off the defense, making defenses freak out because, oh my God, these guys are coming from all sorts of different directions, and you hope there's enough balls to go around. What I don't want to see though is someone like Giant Johnson fall off too much to the point where you say, okay, he's a senior, he came back. Is it hurting his stock? And I know that's not Mario's concern overall, but I do believe that
their job is to do one thing: win football games.
True, but no one can convince me that Giant Johnson's not going to help him do that. Now, I do believe that if there's a guy pushing him, that there's a way to share is what I'm saying. I don't think we're going to see Johnny Johnson disappear.
No,
and I don't think you think that either. Yeah.
No, but their job is to win football games. And I think that the pro potential for the freshmen and for some other players as well, but for the freshmen in particular, is extraordinarily high. Extraordinarily high. And frankly, is higher than for the seniors at the moment. Could it change? Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, if you ask about draft stock of players, you know, look before, go back the last 2 years on who won the Heisman and what their draft stock was going into the season. Neither one of them was a first-round pick, and Joe Burrow, forget about number one overall for Burrow. So things can change and change in a hurry. But right now, I would say that the draft stock for Oregon's freshman receivers, way down the road, obviously, is significantly higher. And even a couple other players. I mean, for instance, I had heard through the grapevine of guys who deal with early draft prognostications and draft scouts and people who operate in that world, that Johnny at the moment is a priority free agent, 7th round grade right now.
Right.
You know, that doesn't mean he can't improve it. Doesn't mean he can't jump up. Doesn't mean he can't, you can't help a team. You know, for any number of reasons, you could get that kind of a grade. Look, Jamar Jefferson last year was borderline Mr. Irrelevant in the NFL draft. Was he Mr. Irrelevant to the Oregon State Beavers? No.
100%.
No. So
Right.
you can be a terrific college player and just not necessarily have the pro prospects to necessarily match it, and vice versa.
Right. So you mentioned it very briefly, but slot, you have Red now listed as an or slightly behind Pittman, whether that matters or not. Pittman's someone who clearly was a very highly recruited kid a couple years ago, starting to maybe make his move. Red, a super senior who came back after last year's COVID season, but hasn't been 100%. How do you see that situation shaking out? Again, it sounds like it's just a situation where they're both going to play. It doesn't really matter who's listed atop the depth chart.
No, and Mike is able to move around to any of the positions. I think that so much of this has to do with, again, you knew that you had your entire receiving core really, but the lead 4 receivers back. And you start there. We mentioned Devin Williams before, Johnny, Mike, and Jalen. When they are in base 11 personnel, there are 3 receivers out there. Well, you had 4 lead guys for 3 spots. And last year, you basically never had all 4 of them available simultaneously at peak operating condition.
Right.
Mike was in and out. Devin was in and out. Johnny, I think, was the only one who was actually on the field and in games on a regular basis. Jalen may have been also, to be honest. But Jalen may have been. So bottom line, you had those 2, but then one's here, one's not here. And you never had all 4 at once, but you got them for 3 spots. So somewhere along the way, one of the spots was moving around. And Micah Pittman has been in that capacity for the better part already of his 2 seasons. Jalen is the slot guy in terms of his more designated role, his more natural role. Johnny's bounced around. He's been the X receiver before. Go back to 2019. Starting off the year, Jawan Johnson eventually took over that role. That's what he was supposed to do. But when Jawan was out, Johnny filled in that capacity. That was, quite honestly, his most natural position is probably the Z. Probably. Franklin is going to be a guy whose natural position is the X. He had actually, ironically enough, started at the Z in the spring. Be that as it may, Mike and Red, they can both play the slot. It's Red's more natural position. Micah can play the Z. He can play the F, the H, whatever we're calling the slot in a given formation and personnel grouping. Because there's just different ways you can list it. I mean, you can technically the tight ends are listed as either the Y or the H, but if the second tight end isn't out there and it's 3 wide or 4 wide or what have you. So anyway, again, I would not make much out of the co-starter thing because you already knew that before you even brought the freshman into the equation, you had 4 lead returning guys for 3 spots. And there was going to be a rotation. And then you add the 3 freshmen, particularly the 2 mid-year guys. And now it's just going to be a regular rotation of guys throughout the course of a game. So I wouldn't make much of that. I don't think who starts in any given week is That could be
Who
simply
has the most catches, right? You can
No,
start with 2 catches, backup comes in and gets 5 catches. It's just
exactly.
the bottom line is they have a ton of depth. They have a ton of young guys coming up who represent more talent than they've had at that position in a long time. There's not one. I think Juwan Johnson is the only former Duck receiver in the NFL right now, and he's playing tight end for the Saints. You have to go back, I think, to Josh Huff, who was a 3rd-round pick. I mean, Mitchell was a 7th-round pick, but never really played. I mean, this is a program that has not produced NFL wide receivers almost at all. I mean, I think you have to go back to Huff, and then before that, Demetrius Williams was a 4th-round pick in 2006, I think, who hung around for a little while. So, but it sounds like that in the next, we'll say they're freshmen now, so 2025 on, they could have 4, 5, 6 guys drafted in a 3-year run.
They could certainly have quite a number. I think right now, in terms of the draft eligible players after this season, and again, this doesn't mean he leaves. This is just draft eligible. That's a big asterisk to that.
Yeah.
I think Pittman has the highest ceiling of the draft eligible receivers. That does not mean I think he's leaving. He has played as many games as he's missed through 2 years. Exactly. And I don't think you can go into the NFL on just talent and ability alone. I think you actually have to show. And that's not a knock to Micah. He had it because what happened? He broke his collarbone. He broke his forearm, contact tracing. Any number of things happen along the way. That's not knocking him. You know, he's missed time because of just happenstance and bad luck. But when he's been out there, he's caught pretty much every single game he's been in, he's had a reception. Other than I think it was just the one with the Oregon State game last year where he technically played, but that was it was so silly just in that. I mean, he really didn't. Didn't. So, like I say, when he's on the field, he can be unbelievably explosive. That's why I see his potential is really, really, really high. But he hasn't shown it over the course of a full regular season. If he's able to do it this year, if you ask me who has the best chance of being a 1,000-yard receiver for Oregon, I'd say, if I had to put odds to it, I'd say Micah and probably Troy Franklin are at the top of the list. And it's because of the position that Troy plays. The X is the bona fide designated stretch the field vertical receiver on any offense. And Micah because of ability as well. So I would say that those two have the best chance of being 1,000-yard receivers, which is also something that this team has not had, this program has not had a ton of over the course of history. So, yeah, I mean, if they're starting with Pittman, and obviously all really starting with the seniors, starting with Johnny and Jalen, but looking ahead to the future, the receiver position is quite bright. And then you get into recruiting and what they got lined up to come in here, and they've got quite a talent influx coming in at the receiver position, which was needed. It needed to be overhauled in a big way.
I've been waiting for that for a long time. Okay, so let's move on to one of the more interesting positions. Corner replacing Diamador Lenore. You got Bridges listed as an or with the 5-star recruit Dante Manning. Bridges, 6'3", came in as a safety, correct? If I'm not mistaken. Big corner. Pete Carroll would love him. Figure Pete Carroll's going to draft him in a few years. How do you see that situation? Again, same thing, but they're both going to play. The or doesn't matter. They're just going to battle it out all season and see where things shake up.
Well, they're going to battle it for this week. We'll see about all season. We're going to see about all season. Well, DJ James is going to get back on the field eventually. DJ James, eventually. I don't know if it'll be for next week.
And you think when he comes back, he's the guy you think? Or
I think that he has to work his way back in because you miss all the fall camp.
Exactly.
You don't just come right back instantaneously. For nothing else, and there's a week-long acclimation period involved. Right. So for him and Jamal Hill. So that's a process that'll play out. But do I think that he eventually works his way over time? Yes. But will they compete for the starting job on Saturday? Yeah. Will they both play significantly on Saturday? Yeah. And I think they were both going to play significantly all season regardless.
Right.
And again, these were guys who were bound to be no worse than the backups at their respective spots.
And
now they're competing for starting
as you said.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, because of the influx, because that position was one where there's an influx of freshmen as well. In terms of for one of the third-year freshmen, Triquez Bridges, and for a really, really highly touted recruit like Manning, who just dealt with a hamstring injury that knocked him out all of last season. But when you're going on the abilities there, and again, we're not saying that the freshmen aren't talented as well. There's a reason why they're on the 2 deep. Part of it is the availability and who's there to fill out the 2 deep, and the other part is but they've got the skill and the ability to play. And receiver and corner are 2 of the positions on anybody's depth chart anywhere in college football where it is the easiest to play early in your career. Right. You're further away from the football. Decision making is not necessarily something that can crush you on any given play if it goes against you necessarily. You can cover up a lot of things in terms of the learning curve for freshmen at those positions. So I think that they're going to compete all week. I don't think who starts is of massive importance necessarily, because I think they're both going to play a significant amount. And then we see what happens. I think there's a chance it could be situational. You mentioned the size disparity between them. I think Bridges could be a red zone guy, and not saying that Manning will play everything before the 20, but I think they could split time before that, and then depending on who they get matched up with when they get inside the red zone, and again, if you're a Ducks fan, you hope that they're not defending the red zone too much. But be that as it may, if it comes up, it'd be seems rather foolish to me. Just in terms of they taught the coaches have acknowledged, hey, he's 6'3", you get certain matchups, you get certain end zone, back end zone, back shoulder fades, all those kinds of things down in the red zone in a short field. Having a guy 6'3" with a 7'2" wingspan out there seems pretty advantageous.
7'2"?
Yeah.
Damn. Okay. Yeah. I didn't know that tidbit.
Yeah.
NBA scouts would love that.
He's quite long. He's got an unbelievable wingspan horizontally, and at 6'3" vertically for a corner. Yeah, that's just hard to find. You can't teach that. So he's
lead the team in passes defended.
As long as he gets out there enough to do it, he's going to have probably ample opportunity starting on Saturday, because guess what? Fresno State's going to have to throw at somebody, and they're not stupid. Just like opposing defenses didn't throw at Diamador Lenore a whole lot last season, and they picked on Mykael Wright a little bit early on. Mm-hmm. Well, now Mykael Wright is the experienced guy and the preseason all-conference guy coming into the year. And these two haven't played as a starting capacity. Manning has basically not played almost at all in college football. They're going to have to pick on somebody, and no matter how they were ranked as recruits, no matter how talented they are, the opposing offense has to put the ball in the air in some direction. So they will probably have ample opportunity to defend some passes on Saturday. Yeah. And guess what? It has to start there, because the next week you've got the best opposing wide receiving core in the country. So you better learn quick, because the following week is baptism by fire.
All right, linebacker. A lot of talk about Justin Flo, clearly one of the biggest recruits in the history of the program. Everyone's seen the photo of him flexing, on the sideline last year, or during practice, I should say. People were dying to see him get out there and play more often, but he's in an OR situation with Drew Mathis, a senior. Again, another situation where the OR doesn't mean all that much. Clearly, Flo is going to play regardless of how things work out. Yeah. They obviously like Mathis. He's a senior. Clearly, I'm sure he's a master of the defense, knows what he's doing, et cetera, et cetera. You have a pretty great situation there, I would say. Do you think that Mathis and Flo will remain in a sort of juggling situation, or do you think Flo is so talented that eventually he might just take over that position?
I think over time, Flo gets it, whether he gets it from snap one, game one on Saturday. Look, go back to last year. Who started at middle linebacker? Mathis. Right. Okay. Who led the team in tackles? Noah Sewell. So ultimately, I think over time, Justin Flo will obviously be at that position and will be there for the mainstay and the lion's share of the reps over the course of the season. In terms of starting for game one, do I think Drew Mathis, between his, as you mentioned, his acumen and experience in the defense, and when he's played well. It's not as always he embarrassed himself out there.
Right.
Again, he's done pretty well when he's played. And commendable for him to have done as well as he's had and the opportunities he's had. So I wouldn't make much of it. Last year, frankly, everybody gets to talk when you bring up like Noah Sewell. Everybody just goes like, well, he started every game last season. You go, I know the season was short and I know it was kind of messed up, but he didn't start every game last season. He didn't start the opener. And no, it's not that big a deal because he was on the field like instantaneously and made a whole bunch of plays. The point is that just shows you how much starting or not starting really even necessarily matters. Right. When you're talking about especially a freshman, or in the case of Flo, all right, a second-year freshman who barely got a chance to play last year because he did get hurt in that opener. All right, you'll see him. You'll see him a whole bunch, and if he delivers any of the hits on starting on Saturday, like he has during the course of the spring and fall camp. I mean, there was some in the spring game where he absolutely leveled guys, some in the first fall scrimmage where he's leveled guys, and these two inside linebackers are just vicious. Both of them can really, really lay the lumber. And yeah, I think it could certainly start on Saturday. And like I said, that doesn't mean that any of the other guys who are going to work in there in the rotation aren't capable either. But clearly, the two former 5-stars and top-ranked inside linebackers in the country, they're there for a reason.
All right, last but not least, Brown is a starter at QB, as was expected. Then you got triple oars behind him with Thompson, Butterfield, and Robbie Ashford. Someone asked Mario yesterday about, maybe getting some time for those guys to see what happened. He wouldn't go there because, of course, playing the backup, experimenting with your freshman QBs means you're blowing somebody out, would be the implication. He didn't want to do that, which I respect that. But clearly, if you're an Oregon fan, you want to see at least Ty Thompson out there throwing. You've heard so much about this kid, one of the top, but actually he is the single highest rated QB Oregon's ever recruited. And he's basically the front runner for the backup job right now. You want to see him play. Do you expect one, a blowout? I think we both kind of do. And two, that Thompson will get out there and show his wares and maybe pull away from the other two guys? Or do you think this is just going to be something they sort of juggle all season until the S hits the fan? Meaning, it's good, because to me it seems like you can just mess around with the oars all you want while Brown is the guy. But if Brown were to get injured, then you have to make a decision. And that's when the truth probably would come out in terms of who is truly the backup. Or do you think there already is one?
I think they'll compete for it this week, and we'll see what happens in terms of a declaration. In terms of the game on Saturday, and we'll obviously get into it a little bit more here in a minute. I don't know if it'll be how lopsided it'll be. I do think Oregon wins, and I do think they win pretty comfortably. But I don't know if
maybe not enough to give Thompson 10 attempts.
Or anybody, whoever's
right.
if they end up getting a second quarterback out there, and I say if because I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. I don't think even if you get up multiple scores, if they're up 2 scores and add a third late, you're not going to have a backup out there with a 2-score game. You're just not. So I don't take it as a foregone conclusion that it ends up happening, especially before the Ohio State game. And another element to this, that I know fans who want to hit fans. Well, yeah, I mean, what can I say? That will be a runaway in a hurry. I mean, they could march out with their scout team, quite honestly. But be as it may, I'm from Long Island. I can say that. Yeah. They're a little bit ahead of, yes. Yeah. Most people have no idea what Stony Brook is.
I have no clue.
Right. So I don't think at quarterback that you try to create. I don't think you go about trying to create controversy. I think that I just think that's incredibly unfair.
Yeah.
At that position more than anywhere else. But I don't think you do that. I just don't believe in that. I'm not telling you that that's what Mario believes or anything or whatever, but if they're up by 35 and somebody gets in the game, that's one thing. Now, having said that, somebody gets in a 5-possession game and goes 4 for 4 for 100 yards because someone breaks it, gets a ton of yards after catch. That doesn't mean that guy is now the infinitely more efficient quarterback. It means that they threw against the third team. Right. You have to keep a little bit of relativity. So I don't think that, like I say, if it's a 2-score game, even a 3-score game, that's necessarily carte blanche to now just invite how many backups out there. I mean, the case in point, how often did you see Tyler Shuck in the 2019 season? And when you did, how many times did you see him pass?
He threw what? 10 passes against Nevada, I think, something like that.
Threw a handful,
and that was
ultimately
like a 60-7 game or something.
Yeah, and ultimately, it was a lot of handoffs.
Yeah.
You know, in 2019, he was 12 of 15 on the season.
Yeah, most of that was against Nevada. Yeah.
It was 8 of
Or
9.
Montana. One of
8
those.
of 9 was against Nevada.
Yeah.
He got out there against Montana and then just handed the ball off. So, point is if it's a runaway, don't take it as an assumption that, oh, well, now, you know, because the other part of being in a runaway is you don't trot your backup quarterback out there to throw on the opponent. One, there's no need. It's totally unnecessary and bad sportsmanship. And
On
two,
third down, though,
why are you?
On third down,
That's
you
different.
can throw it.
You can.
Right.
If you're up comfortably, quite frankly,
run the ball,
and get and melt the clock, and let's get it going. You know, the stands are emptying. It's 35 plus points. Let's keep this show.
I'm getting them out there and throwing hitches, slants, and curls. I'm not trying to rub it in, but I'm giving them some.
Aaron definitely works for a television network and wants to make sure that the commercial inventory gets taken care of. But the rest of us, 100%. Would like the day to keep moving. They'd like to, you know, let's go. Yeah. So okay. I make no proclamations about backups of any position getting in, particularly quarterback on Saturday. And I don't think that you go to turn to and create controversy at the quarterback position.
Oh, it's not creating controversy. The controversy will end the moment the second string comes out because that's the second string. That ends the or right there. It's like whoever they put out there is the second string quarterback. For sure. And I think it's Thompson. I think you think so too. If you had to put your money on it, if we had to wager right now, who would you put your money on? It's Thompson.
I don't know if it's Thompson or Butterfield.
No?
I think it's one or the other. I think it's one or the other. That's the reason why I projected it as one or the other, and I think it's one or the other.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised either way. I would not be surprised either way. Just being honest. If Butterfield goes out there, we've seen him go out there first a whole bunch. Thompson went out there. He did really well in the fall, did good in the spring game, and had a terrific first fall scrimmage. They're both really talented, and that's not knocking Robbie Ashford either. It's just I think those two have created a little bit of separation in that regard, no matter what the Oregon step chart says, and I wouldn't be surprised if either one of them is the backup quarterback, whether that's officially announced, whether you see that on Saturday or not.
Fair enough. Okay, let's move on to the game at hand. I think this is the perfect tune-up game for Ohio State. It's a game, one, you should win. But they're not chumps. Like they're not patsies. This is not a team that you just know you're gonna instantly destroy. They're gonna come out and play hard. They're gonna be feisty. Fresno State always plays tough. They're gonna play like they think they can win. Even the 2012 game, the last time they played them at Oregon, I think it was the second game of the season after Oregon had destroyed Arkansas State. I think it was 42-25. That was Mariota's first year as a starter. Fresno came in and played a really tough game. They were never going to win it, but it was dicey going into the fourth quarter even. So to me, this is the type of team you want to play first. You can play a lot of guys. You can do a lot of things, and you know the other team's going to at least play tough and physical and help you prepare. Much better tune-up game than a Montana or Nevada like they were a couple of years ago. What do you think of the matchup, just from a big picture view before we break down offense, defense?
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of it. I think Fresno State is one, they've historically been a talented team and a well-coached team. And I think that in Kalen DeBoer's second season, that while the outside expectations going into the year, I think they were picked to finish fourth in the division, and they very well still could. But that also doesn't mean that they're going to be like a losing team or something. Right. For one, they have a pretty good amount of transfers from the Pac-12, from junior colleges, and accomplished players who are coming in utilizing that super senior season to basically work their way up, whether it be from junior colleges or FCS, whatever the case is. They have a lot of really experienced players. And when you combine what we're talking about, quarterback with Jake Haener, former Washington quarterback, their lead receiver, Cropper, very talented. Ronnie Rivers, probably the best back in the Mountain West, and frankly, would play for a good number of Pac-12 teams. Not telling you to be the number one back in the league, not telling you to be the number one back for Oregon, but he'd find a way on the depth chart. Right. He ain't bad, that's for sure. He's going to rack up a whole bunch of numbers, and he basically holds damn near every rushing record in that program's history, career rushing record, that is. So, no, they've got a lot of talent there. They were third in the nation in sacks per game last season, again, small sample, but nevertheless. So they've got talent at skill positions. They've got experience at a lot of positions. They create disruption on defense. in terms of opening opponents and Mountain West opponents and Group of 5 opponents in general, this is legit. It's a legit game. It's not going, the line is 20.5. It's not 40.
Right.
It's
exactly.
You're yes, Oregon's a top 15 team. They should win. They should win comfortably. They're at home. All those, yes, and a million times yes. Fresno State is still not a pincushion.
Right. Ooh, pincushion. I like that. So they were 3-3 last year. They returned. Mario said 20 of 22 starters. I take his word for it. I'm not counting them. Tons of seniors on their depth chart. You mentioned the running back, Ronnie Rivers, 5'9", 195, kind of smallish type back, sort of like a die. Averaged 85 yards per game last season. Caught 265 yards worth of receiving yards. Rushed for 61 last week against the Huskies in the blowout. Now the Huskies, UConn, they didn't play at all last year, is my understanding. I think they sat out the entire season. So that was their first game action since 2019. So the fact that
and it looked like
it. They blew them out 42-0, I think it was, to be expected. That was a pincushion game. You mentioned the QB had 331, 3 TDs against UConn last year, averaged 336 per game, 14 touchdowns, 5 picks, 65% completion rate. So this guy's no joke. If Oregon secondary, they're a little green back there, they're going to be tested, I think, more by Ohio State, but this is a good tune-up for that. Jalen Cooper averaged 87 yards a game last year, scored 5 touchdowns. That was just in 6 games. So, yeah, there's some threats there on offense. Again, nothing to where you wouldn't think that talent-wise, and we talked about the talent level Oregon's put together on defense with all these 5- and 4-star kids, especially in the front 7. This is nothing that front 7 shouldn't be able to handle. But if they don't come to play, if they make mistakes, this team will put up some yards and they will put up some points, which is what Vegas expects, which is why it's only a 20.5-point spread, as you said.
Yeah, look, again, an experienced team, they're going to capitalize on errors.
Yeah.
It'd be one thing if you're taking over, a Mountain West team and it's a big rebuild and, you got a whole bunch of freshmen or the second and third year freshman transfers who had to come in. No, these transfers that came in are a bunch of older guys. And again, you talk about the returning players. Yeah, 20 of 22 starters and then added guys via the portal out of those realms. So, again, talented, really legitimately talented. And I'm not telling you it's going to go out there and going to be down to the wire game. But it's still a matter of saying, but you can legitimately respect this opponent.
Yeah. And sometimes, like point spread thing, I think sometimes people see a 20-point spread and think, they're going to blow them out. But the spread is based on the team that's
trying to get an even money. It's trying to get even money.
Yeah,
it's not trying to be predictive of anything.
Well, no, I understand that. But I'm saying that sometimes people frame it as, they shouldn't have any problem. They could just show up. No, the point spread is based on the idea that Oregon is going to play well. So if Oregon doesn't play well, that 20 points suddenly becomes 13 or 10, and then anything can happen. So that's why I just think it's a great opponent for them out the gate, because we're gonna learn a lot about this team. If they come out and they roll right through this team, if they win 55-17, that's a huge positive that this team could be really legit heading into Ohio State. If they win 40-30, you're kind of like, it was a good opponent, but that doesn't necessarily bode well moving forward. Okay, let's move to the defense. They allowed 30 points per game last season. And I think that's one of the things where you say, again, they returned a lot of starters, but their defense wasn't great. They did get a lot of sacks, as you said, but Oregon's O-line is pretty good. They allowed teams to rush for 5.2 yards per carry, 212 yards rushing per game. This to me is a team that I want to see this offense. One, I've talked about the run game before. I want to see the run game become more dominant than it ever has been in the Mario era. And 2, Ken Brown put up big numbers. We haven't seen it yet because he hasn't played that much for Oregon. So if that team was giving up that much last year, to me, you want to see Oregon get into the 40s and rush for 250, and maybe Brown throws for 250 before he leaves the game, in my opinion.
All fair points. I'm going to be relatively brief, only in that my battery's about to die here again, so I'm not going to go at length.
You got to charge your laptop, man. Come on.
I did. We've gone for 50 minutes, so it's not built for forever. An old one is what I've got. So, no, all fair points. Look, again, I think you want to see a pretty dominant performance. In terms of actual yard numbers and everything. If you want prop bets, we can come up with all kinds of lines on any number of individual stats. To me, I think you want to see a dominant performance if you're a Ducks fan, because they do go to Ohio State the following week. And obviously, again, that test is going to be substantially more difficult, suffice to say. So, again, in terms of actual hard numbers, you can come up with any number of combinations.
Okay. So since your battery is dying, first of all, so fans know, you can watch Ohio State Thursday against Minnesota. I think that's on ESPN. Let's get our game predictions for the Fresno State game.
I believe Fox, but be that as it may.
Is it Fox? Sorry.
You can find it. You can find it.
Yeah, you find it. Okay, so give me your prediction for Fresno State, Oregon.
Earlier in the week, I had picked it as, I believe, 38-14. And I realized that's kind of almost straddling the line. It's basically saying they'll cover narrowly. I have a feeling I'm probably going to end up sticking more or less around there, 38-14, 35-14, right around there.
Okay. I'm going to go 44-24 only because I think that the passing game is going to make some plays. And I do think they tack on a touchdown late, probably after they're, maybe down 44-17, they get a cheap touchdown late. I do think it's going to be a fascinating matchup just from the standpoint of really, because last year was just such a bizarre year, right? That's like you said, it's numerous times. It's just really hard to know what to extract from that, right? And so the last time we've seen this team at full strength doing its thing was 2019, and that team is pretty much almost all gone. So this really is just really a learning game to really see these guys play together in a true football setting for the first time since I think since 2019, best if you just want to wipe away the COVID year. So I think it's going to be a fun game to watch. I'm looking forward to it, and I'll be there with you. My first time in Austin since I can't even remember. It's been so long, 2 years at least.
Yeah, it's been a minute. Now, looking forward to seeing a good number of people at the building on Saturday morning as well, and into the early afternoon. Obviously, will be a lot of fun on Saturday, and it sets up for the following week, yes, and the trip to Columbus. So we'll get into it more and recap this game, and then set up next week's big matchup at Ohio State for Oregon as well. This is James Crepea, and he is Aaron Fentress for the Oregonian and OregonLive and the Ducks Confidential podcast. Appreciate you for listening. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast. That way it just shows up on your phone, makes it nice and easy. Give us a rating, review, etc. It really helps people find the show as well. We'll see you next week.
Take care. Get vaccinated.